to welcome you. This is part of the Campus County Connection webinar series. So if you haven't joined us before, it's a little tasting of what it's about. We try to find projects and faculty that may have a connection to Extension and some Extension educators and just share with you a little bit of a showcase. It's not definitely not a skill building training. It's really more like a peripheral learning, or if you like to listen to NPR, it's like hearing a little bit about something that's really interesting and could possibly be connected to your work. So thank you for joining us. This will be recorded, and at the very end I'll show you where it's located in case you want to share with any of your collaborators or stakeholders. That is totally good. So with that, I really want to welcome Nina Bassuk. I'm very excited to have you here. This was a great opportunity to get to know Nina's work a little bit more. So this is the fun part about my job, is I have a chance to talk with all of these presenters of the Campus County series, and I may have been reviewing reports that you sent in for a few years, but actually getting up close and personal and hearing more about the stories from staff and faculty is really much more interesting. So with that, Nina, I'll ask you to share a little bit about yourself, and then we can go right into the presentation.
Okay, well, nice to be here. I see all your faces in my mind's eye. But many of you know me for many years. I've been working at Cornell in the Urban Horticulture Institute for the last 37 years, and been working on the problems of growing plants in cities and understanding the limitations and opportunities of growing plants in cities, and focusing most on establishment and how do we get new landscapes to grow and to thrive in difficult sites. So that's, you know, me, most of my work is in that area. So should we go straight into it? Right. So we're kind of highlighting urban trees for changing climate, but really for the slide of the United States, our climates in urban areas have been changed for quite a while. We predate the climate change writ large. As we know, urban areas are very different from rural countryside surrounding areas, and they have been focusing on this difficult sites for many years. And we are in the Northeast Corridor really urbanized in terms of, and this is going to continue to grow as our population grows. So we expect plants to do many things for us, not just look beautiful and make us feel wonderful, but we have plants provide ecosystem services. Stormwater is a big issue right now in many communities where stormwater reduction is important. Water and air quality improvement. Trees can, of course, reduce stormwater by entraining water and taking it up by the roots. Trees reduce pollution both in soil and in air. They conserve energy, and you know this by, on a hot day like today, which is amazingly hot, staying under a tree with some leaves will give you a little bit of respite. Trees sequester carbon. They take up carbon in their wood and hold it until the tree actually comes down, and that's a big issue for today. And urban heat island mitigation is a big question in urban areas where we have hotter than normal temperatures, even more than climate change would suggest. And of course, other issues. Plants provide a habitat for pollinators and animals, and many other issues that trees actually provide services. So we need to keep them healthy. We need to allow them to reestablish in places that have been devastated by construction, and that's what we're about. So I have a process I've been talking about for many years in terms of the steps that you take to establish a new landscape. And first, it starts with understanding your site conditions. And in the urban environment, we have some different conditions than you might just in your backyard. We'll go over a few of those, and then hopefully making the best plant selections. And here we have some new issues to think about in terms of climate change, plant selection. We might have a few new plants we can try out in the landscape. But many times our sites are so limited that we need to modify them. And we're talking really about soil here. Soils after construction have been devastated and compacted and really don't provide the resources that we require to grow plants. And then finally, transplanting techniques. I'm getting more and more into the area of transplanting because the trees that you choose and the sites that you provide are great as long as the trees don't really kick into their abilities to withstand stress until they're over the first 2, 3, 4 years of planting in the ground. So this is an issue I'm also looking at. So go on, basic requirements for plant growth. You know all these, oxygen both above ground and below ground, water, light for photosynthesis, minerals, carbon dioxide, plenty of that, appropriate temperatures. These are the basic things, and we look at the environment in terms of how they can afford to give us these resources. In urban environments, just looking at the woodiness zone map here. It's an old one, but it gives you a good idea of the differences between the average minimum winter temperatures in New York, very varied state. I think only second to Alaska or California, we have the most varied winter hardiness zones because of the lakes and the mountains and the ocean. So we have tremendously varied winter temperatures, and these are changing slightly, and as we'll talk a bit more later, the winter temperatures are getting a bit warmer. But in urban areas, we have, if you look at the red line here, over a 24-hour period, you see the urban areas. This happens to be in California, but it could be anywhere, are considerably hotter than the surrounding area. So urban heat islands, typically we're within 2 to 4 degrees hotter in general in the urban downtown than we are in surroundings. But when you get to microclimates, really, small areas in urban areas, you can find tremendously hotter kinds of climates in urban areas. So this predates climate change, if you like. The urban heat island is well known, and we have been dealing with warmer than normal temperatures for a while. So when we get to microclimates, we have a lot of effect of reflected heat and light from surfaces such as buildings, cars, asphalt, concrete. And this really gives rise to the urban heat island, if you like. But on a micro scale, I think we got the right, yeah, this is one of my favorite pictures. Maybe some of you have seen this. On the right-hand axis, you see a temperature scale from the blue, which is 67 degrees Fahrenheit, to the orange, which is about 105 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're looking at a park. We're looking at some trees standing, just the base of trees. And I can point out that the blue blobs around those trees are the shade that the trees are providing on top of grass. And so that's about 67 degrees on the shade of those trees. And we come out into the sunlight as we move down the slide. It's sort of greenish, bluish color. We're about 82 degrees, and that's grass in the sun. It's the surface temperature we're looking at. Then we get down below to the bottom of the slide. We're looking at, which many of you will recognize, this is pavement. This is, in fact, concrete sidewalk, which is about 105 degrees in this instance. So quite a, different. If we had asphalt, it'd be about 135 degrees. So wow. Quite a difference. And when you open your car in a big box parking lot and it's hot, you know why it's hot, because asphalt is really reflecting a tremendous amount of heat onto you. So these kinds of microclimate issues based on reflected heat is a tremendous effect on plants.
That is such a cool slide.
Isn't that a great slide? That's taken with an infrared camera, which measures the surface temperature. Wish I could get my hands on one. They're pretty expensive. Anyway, we're looking at a site here, which is a south-facing brick wall with some trees against the wall. This is in Ithaca, and this little area was left over after that parking garage was built, and nothing was done to that site, but some trees were plunked down in there, and you can see they're pretty crispy looking. So the issue here is the fact that we're getting about 125 degrees coming off of that brick wall facing south in the sun, and the trees are just losing water so fast that they cannot take up enough water from the root zone. And I always give people, what would you do kind of question when I look at this slide, and people say, oh, water them. Well, that would be the obvious, thing, because water is a limiting factor here. But that's not possible in many urban environments. There's not municipal help or workforce to be able to come and water these every week. People say paint the brick wall white. Well, that will reduce some of the holding of heat, but it will reflect a tremendous amount of heat, nevertheless. And then we get into, well, what can we do? If we want to, presumably we want to keep these trees, we want them to get healthy. Well, first thing we can do is get rid of the grass, because that's a great competitor for water. And then we found when we were looking at this that the trees were planted in holes, if you like, and soil was so compact the roots never got out of the original holes that they were planted in. So the roots had a very small area of soil to grow into to get the water that they needed. So we took off the grass, and then we came in with a small bobcat, and we broke up the areas between the root holes, not disturbing the roots as much as possible, and then we added compost to these trenches and mulched the entire area. And so the next couple of years, this is what it looked like, the same trees.
I'm so glad you have an after picture.
Oh, we always have an after picture because it's pretty hard looking at that first one. And this is the same trees that were growing there. They were not taken out. You see it's mulched underneath. And interestingly, the trees now are providing a different atmosphere for themselves because they're shading that wall. So they're reducing the stress on themselves by growing in a vigorous fashion. And of course, that would also help us in terms of reducing the urban heat island, all those reflected heats from that building. So we can do things if we understand where the stresses are coming from, where are the factors. And there are other issues we need to talk about where we're planting trees. And this still happens more than I would like to see, that when we have utility wires up above, not the thick black ones on the below, but the really high ones, which are triple phase or single phase wires, those need to be kept clear of trees, and we plant trees that are mature, too big a size under these wires, and then utility companies have to come and do this kind of massacre, which often gives rise to demise of trees. When you have to take off so much of the tree canopy or reduce the amount of food that the tree can make for itself, and often this starts to start to get a decline in the trees after this kind of pruning happens. So we choose better trees that are matured at height that's below the wires, not tiny little trees, but trees that mature at a height of about 30 feet. And they still give you good-sized trees, but not interfering with the wires. And then there's below ground, which is a really the big issue of finding space for trees. And you can see, I love this slide, it's like, where's the tree? And it's right at the back in the phone booths. Who knows phone booths anymore? But there's a little tree in a container which is dead. And because we need to find room underground for trees to grow to really provide the benefits to mitigate the urban heat island and to reduce stormwater and give us energy conservation and shade, all these things require trees to have enough soil. That's one big takeaway. It's finding enough soil to have the trees grow to their envisioned size. So this is it. This is the good stuff. This is what I always say to people, I said, why does this look good? And of course you can't be talking to me right now, but
you can be chatting in, and I'm going to jump in and just remind folks to open up your chat.
And I know I'm preaching to the converted here. But,
that is true. I see a lot of the choir here in the audience, but do open up your chat and set your chat to everyone, and do ask questions if you have questions, or respond back. It makes things more interesting.
If you feel like doing that. If not, I'll jump to the chase here, which is what we're seeing, why it looks good if we're gardeners, and all of us are gardeners, is that we're seeing clumps and spaces. That's very technical. Clumps are the soil heads or aggregates that are glued together, and then there are dark spaces between there, which allows water to drain through and oxygen to come in. So the clumps, it's like a Goldilocks. We have to have water holding, but water drainage. And when you have water drainage, you have air coming in. So it can't be too many clumps or too many spaces. So the clumps hold the water, and the spaces let it drain away. And intrinsically, if we garden, we know that this is good. But this is not so good. This is what we get in compacted urban areas where the soil, you see those spaces are gone. I mean, there are pores in that very compacted soil, but they're so tiny that they don't allow water to drain well at all. And the soil itself is so hard that roots cannot penetrate it. So this is a big issue. We might have soil underground in urban areas which have been impacted by construction and so on, but the soil may not be accessible. And this is what we need to think about. So site assessment is understanding site opportunities and limitations. Sometimes you have opportunities, and that's an interesting thing. When we are in microclimates in urban areas, we have often more sheltered environments, but more often we have limitations. And this is a housing, well, basically a site, the staging area for a housing development that was just to the left of this in Ithaca. And after this housing development was built, the contractor said, well, come, you can have this, you can take it to the city of Ithaca, make this a park, whatever. So we did, and by understanding, you can see the standing water, compaction, no drainage. You can, we can regrade it, take the junk away, but the soil has been majorly compacted, and we need to do many different things to be able to grow plants. And we go from this to this, the same site, a few years later, and there are certain subtle things you see here. We're looking right at a berm, so we're actually building up with good soil on top of crappy soil. And in other parts of the park, we did other techniques to allow these plants to really grow and to find rooting space. But this is the same site as we just saw. And, we see this all the time where we have, you can see the tire tracks. These are newly planted trees in a housing development. After rain, no drainage, compaction, these trees, and then, of course, you put some soil on top to make it look nice and neat, a couple of inches of topsoil. And that's basically for the grass, for the turf, because it has not affected anything to do with those trees. And in this particular housing development, which interestingly, we worked on about 15 years ago, is now being taken down and redone. But most of the trees died, not surprisingly. Of course, poor drainage and compacted soil are major issues. And in urban environments, we get a lot of people say, well, this is only temporary. We're only doing this as a temporary utility work. And I love the tree protection. Can you see that? The orange fence around the tree?
It's a little like the ag quad right now.
Yeah, I won't even walk there anymore. None of you should see the ag quad for a couple of years. But so a lot of people think that if you're protecting the tree, you're protecting the trunk. But really, what we're doing is we want to protect the soil and the roots. So we need a root protection zone, a soil and root protection zone, to enable to keep that tree in good shape. And that's not what we're seeing here. So we like to look where roots are, and we've done some work with an air excavation tool, as you see here. So there are some big Norway maples on this tree lawn, and we took up 4 inches of concrete, and we're excavating down to see where the roots are. And that's where the roots are. So the roots are actually under the concrete, just under the concrete, where there's a little area of weakness between the base course of the gravel and the concrete. So roots can, kind of explore that area, and they actually growing into somebody's front yard, where they're getting all what they need in terms of water, oxygen, nutrients, and better soil. So that big tree, a 24-inch tree on the tree lawn, is not at all utilizing the soil in the tree lawn alone. It is getting into somewhere else, where it's be able to get what it needs. So there's no way you can grow a big tree like that in a very small space. But roots, if you see something like this, the big tree in a small space, be assured the roots are not just there. They are somewhere else, whether it's in the sewer, whether it's going through a conduit, they can find places to go. And if the tree is healthy, the roots will have expanded quite a bit. So, so this is an issue. So this is there are Wegmans in town, and a pretty big planting islands. There are like 32 by 8 planting islands, pretty generous for some parking lots. But you see here, these trees are just doing really poorly. These are red oaks, and And when they were doing some rebuilding, here's that same island, and look what you see. Basically, no drainage at the bottom. You're literally a bathtub in the parking lot. So, and red oaks do not like wet feet. They do not tolerate wet conditions. However, given the same condition, if you had decent soil in the planting area, still no drainage, you could have chosen trees that would have tolerated this and would have been fine. Swamp white oak comes to mind, but there are several others that would look great. So, the worst case scenario is when you're putting a tree in a cutout or basically a pit in the sidewalk. This is a 4x5 foot. Used to be typical for New York City. Now it's 10x5 is more standard for New York City. Tree pit still inadequate, but we're putting this big ball into that little hole, and we're hoping it's going to do well. It often lives for a very short life. So lack of volume. Again, here's Pennsylvania Avenue, willow oaks on the left and on the right, very different sizes. Those on the left growing a large open volume of soil, and those on the right in a vault, actually suspended under the sidewalk. And I've come back to those trees again, and the trees in the lawn are just basically growing over the trees. There still are a few trees in those vaults, very skinny, very little crown.
So they were both planted at the same time.
And the same species, right?
That is very interesting.
Yeah, so it's all about soil volume. And then here we see what happens when there's a parking lot and the compaction necessary to put that paving down because we need to compact. It has to be load bearing for a sidewalk or asphalt. But the tree area, which was very generous in this case, relatively, the soil was not prepared at all. And they put 3 or 4 inches of topsoil, planted the tree, and very unstable. And in a hurricane, basically this tree came down because the roots were very restricted in terms of where they could grow. Okay, so here's not the back. There's the ag quad as you see it, and not this debacle. This is a few years ago when we were redoing Man Library.
And for those of you who haven't been to campus in a while,
yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. And so, but it's a good learning moment. I take my students out there and say, this is what not to do. But hopefully we'll be able to repair this next year. But anyway, this was when Man Library was being redone, and there was for 3 years there was a construction site on campus. For 3 years, those trailers and all the debris and materials were on campus on the quad. And so after that came out and the beautiful Man Library was redone, we had very difficult soil conditions. So here again, we're seeing compacted soil, poor drainage. And then this is another indication where you have, none of those little clumps. You have clogs, and you have this blue-gray color of the soil, which is indication of no oxygen. Where you get a little bit of rust, it's because the oxygen is hitting the iron in the soil and you're getting rust. But that blue-gray color is a real indicator that's poor drainage, of no drainage, no oxygen, and that's a killer for plant roots. So we came to these sites and we said, well, what could we do about this? And this is starting 2000, year 2000, we started to, in my class, look at these damaged sites and say, how can we bring them back? Not just planting the right plant material, but in this case, we had to do something to remediate the soil so that the plants could grow. And we did something called the very technical scoop and dump technique, where we apply 6 to 8 inches of compost just to the surface of the compacted soil, and use a bucket, backhoe, to dig down to 18 inches, scooping up the compost with the compacted soil and then dropping it down, scooping and dumping. So we would get veins of compost through this cloddy compacted soil and breaking it up, but really not rototilling it. It's just kind of very coarse kind of remediation, but a lot of compost now. I mean, it's not just 2 inches of compost. We're talking 6 to 8 inches of compost, digging down to 18 inches and getting a third or more by volume compost into this soil. And then when we plant, and then we mulch every year to replenish your organic matter, because we're putting so much in to reduce the density and to give those microorganisms a charge so they can do their work and making nutrients and soil structure better. We had to get the organic matter back because it would be used up, and so we just tried mulching every year. And the combination of the increase of microorganisms and the mulch actually was taken in and replenished the organic matter. So over time, our research has shown that doing this over the years, we actually got better conditions after 12 years, let's say, than we did in the first year when it was newly broken up. So that was, that was kind of unusual too. I thought it would be best the first year, and then it would sort of slowly get worse again. But in fact, it got better over time. So this is a technique we are still looking at, still doing research on, but it's really available to be out there. And if we want to take a minute to actually show a video, just as a 3-minute video of just this technique, it's something that's not difficult to do. It doesn't have to be with a backhoe. You could do it by hand, much easier with a machine or a bobcat. So hopefully Celeste will find. Hopefully. Gonna go.
This is a production
Yep.
of Cornell University.
No.
I have my volume kind of low, so you can talk over it if you'd like.
Yeah, so this is just an area, great having 40 students to do this work. But this is compost, the Cornell compost, that we're adding in a thick layer to bioswales, which were just turf bioswales. They were an old school way of course, the students in the rain. But we're putting a pretty thick layer of compost in the entire area of the back of the bioswale. You see those yellow flags? In a minute you'll see them again. That's protecting the tree root system so that the backhoe, which is now scooping and dumping, is not going to interfere with many of the roots of the trees that are on it.
Is there anything on our way?
Yes, generally there are good guidelines with the tree. You see the tree has a 6-inch diameter. Then you grow at least 6 feet radius, if not a 9-foot radius of protection. Okay. And here, you see how rough it is there? It's we did, you see some grass clumps, but they were rounded up, so they were still, they thought they were alive, but they weren't. And we're putting trees and shrubs into this area that can tolerate both, a little bit of wet soil when the parking lots drain into them, but also a lot of times dry soil because it doesn't rain. So the main thing is preparing the soil. And after we planted, we mulched, about 2 or 3 inches of shredded bark and all these newly planted shrubs. And that was May 1st of 2014. This is what the picture is looking at now, just after planting. And there are 3 connected bioswales. There's a rice hall parking lot draining into these. And so that's what it looked, and I'm going to show you what it looks like in the 2nd year and the 3rd year. 4 months later, it looks pretty good. So this is September, and things are growing pretty well. You see it's capturing the drainage from the parking lot. A lot of people think that plants for bioswales need to be really wet tolerant. Well, they need to be wet tolerant a little bit, but they really need to be dry tolerant as well because most of the times it's not raining. You can see the opening from the parking lot draining water into the bioswales. So 14 months later, things are really looking better. We have some hypericums in bloom there. We got a lot of different plants, and some on the sides of the berm versus in the bottom of the berm are slightly different in their abilities to tolerate water, and all of them are drought tolerant. So this is the 2nd year. Lots of experimenting with some plants that I wanted to see how they would do in some of these areas. And this is last July, so 2016, and so it's this 3rd year, or the 2nd full year of planting, and you can see that it's really gotten thick. We planned for closed canopies so that there's very little weed pressure except around the edges, and the plants actually start providing their own mulch as they drop their leaves. Now we're still mulching it, but I'm not sure when we have to stop mulching. So my inclination is that once you have a closed canopy and you have all this leaf drop, then you're going to not have to mulch as much. But so you
This
can
has
see
been a
that basically
production of
all that
Cornell
soil
University.
preparation
On the web at Cornell.
has a major effect on how plants grow in those very difficult sites. It was a very compacted site. So we allow for infiltration, getting water in, and that's a major part of ecosystem services which we are requiring in that bioswale. So we can go back to the slides.
Okay, so I'm going to stop my share, and I believe you have to share again.
Oh, I do? Okay.
Yeah. So that was really awesome. It looked really beautiful. So I'm going to go down to share screen.
Thank you.
And then pull your slides back up again.
Okay.
I may have to
So
find-
there, yeah, here we are.
There you go.
So that was the idea we just saw in a little video, but this is the scoop and dump. And we have many years of research showing that this really makes things better. You don't want to just, I don't use a rototiller. We don't go down 6 inches. We go down 18 inches because this really gives us a bigger soil volume for the plants to grow in. And that's that same site, Man Library, the second year actually after we redid it, and it's done very, very well compared to what that construction site was. So, I mean, if you have any questions or comments, we might want to just pause for a little bit here. And if anybody wants to chime in before we go on.
So you can go ahead and add your questions to the chat. And while we're waiting to see if anybody has a question, I'll shoot a question over to you, which is just on the question of mulching. Or, you know, is there any recommendations on the type of mulch or mulches not to use?
Well, don't use red mulch.
The dyes?
Well, no, I just have it. Aesthetically, I think that's awful.
Right. No,
and actually, I've seen a place where they dye the mulch, and the stream next to it was just red. I mean, it was, anyway, that's another. We use shredded bark is the common, cheap way of doing it. You can use wood chips. I like biodegradable mulches, which actually are organic matter, which is going to be taken into the soil as long as you feed that soil with compost to get the microorganisms going. That all that mulch will be taken in by that. So I'm not a fan of plastic mulches or things like that. So any biodegradable mulch will do whatever.
I was really wondering about the dyed versus not dyed, because I think so many of the mulches that are out there are
supposed to look like redwood or something.
I don't know. Well, even the darker.
Yeah, they sometimes have black mulch
mulches.
too. They're dyed black. I've actually seen blue mulch once. Which I won't show that picture. But I just think that's you know, an aesthetic thing, which I don't think it's harmful, but it's just aesthetically displeasing. And of course, you shouldn't pile mulch up against the tree, and you should have, you know, basically a wide area of mulch around. If it's a single tree, you know, as much, if you can go to the drip line, the end of the canopy, that's great. No mulch should touch a tree bark, because that's a problem in parking lots. We see lots of mulch making a volcano mulching, which can cause problems. Yeah. But in this case, we're mulching an entire site, and so we're not worried about that kind of volcano issue.
So I don't see questions coming in, but if anybody wants to share, oh, here we go, from Jerry. Is the pavement near the area where you did the scoop and dump salted in the winter?
Good question, yeah. So the parking lot area where we did this scoop and dump is salted. And the good thing about, so basically you're talking about rock salt, NaCl, sodium chloride. And what the good thing about doing a scoop and dump and having deep, fast infiltration and good drainage is that when that salt melts in spring rains, that is going to wash right through the root profile and then basically be gone. Because if we have salt on the surface and we don't have good drainage, with spring rains, the salt will just sort of stay there, and it's potentially harmful. We've done testing of salt in bioswales right next to Tower Road, really narrow ones, and we'll typically get pretty high salt levels in the winter, but by the time the spring rains are gone, if we've got good drainage, it's important to have good drainage in those bioswale soils, the salt is gone. And that's when the trees are starting to grow, and so they don't get it. Of course, I wouldn't put evergreens there, but that's another issue, and But for deciduous plants, the roots are not taking it up at that point.
Mhm.
That's a good issue. So drainage and salt are sort of interlinked.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it for now in terms of questions.
Okay.
But keep them coming, folks.
Yeah. So tree selection, important to match up the genetic potential of a tree with the environmental reality of what you have there. And the environmental reality is the site assessment, what we just sort of figured out by looking at the soil and the above ground conditions. So what trees are best? Let's look at some tree issues. So there's it's kind of a hierarchy I look at when I'm thinking about it. Is it adaptable to the site? Cold hardiness, heat tolerance. Obviously our hardiness zone, that's going to change somewhat in terms of winter hardiness. Most of our climate change is, we're finding two major things. The winters are getting warmer, and the rainfall fluctuation, we may have no difference in annual rainfall, but the fluctuation between rainfall events will be longer and the rainfall events will be more extreme. Like last summer here, we had 6 weeks of no rain. It was really a dry summer, but it didn't really change the annual rainfall because we didn't get some big events, 3 inches here, which replenished in terms of an annual rainfall. The other thing we're seeing in terms of the heat cold is we're seeing fluctuations in the winter of temperature. I know many of you had this sort of warm spell in late February. We had 70-degree temperatures in late February for a few days. And I think that's going to be more the issue. The most difficult thing is to tolerate, is to understand how we can plant for these fluctuations in winter. So we can think about that for a minute. Space, obviously above ground, below ground, these are still the fundamentals of dealing with trees in the face of climate change. We still have to think about the fundamentals of space above ground, below ground, sunshade, microclimates, wet and dry soil conditions, soil volume, soil pH, the availability of nutrients and salts and so on. These are still the fundamentals applied. There's not going to be a magic bullet to choose plants that will tolerate all kinds of climate change. So tree selection in all these things is important. We're looking at some silver lindens right here. I want to go through a few trees that might have some opportunities for you to plant. And also we're thinking about, in terms of ecosystem services, there's a trend in this country to plant smaller and smaller trees. Whereas if we were going to have some of these ecosystem services, where we have the space and the volume of soil to do this, we should plant trees that have a larger canopy, because we are going to be reducing our ecosystem services. We plant only small plants.
So while you were talking, question came in. I'll just throw it out there in case you might address it in the next few slides. But it's, can you address planting a monoculture?
Well, we'll get there.
Okay.
I think we'll just give me a minute or so, because I think we're going to get there in a little bit. So here's a few trees that some of them you may be very familiar with, like this is Donald Wyman crabapple. And with the crab apples, there's right now they're just about, there's still some in Ithaca, but they're about finishing. But there's no reason to choose a crabapple without thinking about the disease and insect susceptibility. On the resources I'll show you at the end, there are lists of plants of crabapples that are resistant to the 4 major diseases, and this is one of them. Donald Wyman is one of them. But there are 4 major diseases: powdery mildew, apple scab, cedar apple rust, and fire blight can devastate crabapples. However, if you can choose those that are disease and insect resistant, they are very, very tough trees. Crabapples will tolerate drought, they'll tolerate high alkaline soils, and they are, magnificent trees. So don't say they're just ordinary, because if you choose the right ones, you have terrific results. So some of the hawthorns, this is Winter King hawthorn. This is again a tree for underwires. As you can see, the utility wires there. It's one of the more. This is Winter King, or Crataegus viridis. Winter King is one of the shorter, well, not 20 feet, 25 feet in height, and blooming in another week or so, and then It has these very orange-red berries that give it its name, Winter King, which may stay until March before they actually fall to the ground or eaten by birds. And this is a very tough tree. There's some thorns, but a really good tree for drought and alkalinity. Really tough tree for that condition.
So I'll add that after Nina's presentation is over, and when I post the slides, the slides will actually have the names of the trees on them. So if you're worried about writing any of this stuff down, just know that it will be in the handout that will be available on the website.
So nice slides. Do and some don't. This is golden rain tree. So I've looked at some interesting research based on the pollinator habitat for usefulness of trees. And one of the things that's really important is to have trees that bloom all different times of the year. And this one blooms in the summer, anywhere from July to September, depending on the cultivar. And so, most of our trees bloom in the spring, and that's great. But if we can have trees that bloom in the summer and the fall, we're actually going to be supporting more of those pollinators. So golden rain tree, originally introduced in this country by Thomas Jefferson, is an incredibly tough tree, over the top 5 in terms of drought tolerance and alkalinity, soil tolerance, and heat tolerance. I've seen this in Texas where it's several weeks over 100 degrees, and this tree will do very well. So a very tough tree for hot and dry conditions. Well, silver linden is one of my favorite lindens. It's much more tolerant of drought than is little leaf linden, which is more common. You can see the underside of the leaf here, a silver color giving its name. It's a very formal looking tree, but I want to show you something really interesting. This is on the left, you'll see the underside of the leaf, and you see the little stomates, the pores that let the water come in and the carbon dioxide go in and the water go out. But you see these white like umbrella things? These are called trichomes, or structures on the leaf that act as little umbrellas and reduce the amount of water loss from the leaf. That's what gives it a silver color. But isn't this amazing? Looking like little amoebas, just sort of reducing water loss from the underside of the leaf.
That's so cool.
Isn't that cool? I just love that picture. And here you see on the right the silver linden in fall color. So this, if you like lindens and you like, this is one that you should really think about. It's much tougher. It has less Japanese beetle problems than little leaf linden or basswood. But the silver linden's a great tree. This is one here in Ithaca. You can see it's in a cutout on the sidewalk. This is a tree I've been happily getting nurseries to start to grow. This is chinkapin oak, which is Quercus muhlenbergii. It's in the white oak family, so probably not so much a problem with oak wilt. And this is an oak that actually prefers alkaline soil, and it's actually growing in structural soil. You can't see that under the sidewalk, but it is doing in structural soil, doing exceptionally well in a very hot, dry environment where the pH is 8.0. So an oak that loves high pH, this is a chinkapin oak. So another tree, well, on the right-hand side, you see our common smoke bush, or our European smoke bush in a tree form. It's just an odd one we had here. But on the left is the one I want to point out, which is the American smoke bush, which is rare, and it shouldn't be rare. It's a fantastic either multi-stem or single-stem small tree with phenomenal fall color, drought tolerance, alkalinity tolerance, and a really great tree that should be grown more. And you can find it. You have to look for it. But I think the supply and demand issue here is you start to ask for it and get your nurseries to grow this. It's a really great tree for tough environments. Well, we have a Kentucky coffee tree, which is one of my favorites. It has a great coarse branching structure. And here I see one on the street here in Ithaca. This is one where if you're planting this in a neighborhood, you're planting it maybe at 2-inch caliper or so. You have to, you might have some pushback in that there are very few branches initially. Now, I've had homeowners come out to me and say, "What are you planting there? It looks like a stick." Give me a real tree. Give me a maple. I said, "Well, we've got plenty of those." But I said, but this is just give it a year or two. It becomes an amazingly beautiful tree, branching structure, leaf. And it is one of those tough trees that will tolerate most soil conditions, alkaline, good soil, dry soil, and one of the top tough trees. Does have fruit if you get the female, so some people don't like that. If you want to get a male, there are the cultivars called espresso, which is a cute name for a Kentucky coffee tree. So espresso is a male and does not have the fruit. Otherwise, it's the same. So oaks are an area I've been working on for many, many years, and I need to let you know that oaks are still out there and still important. So this is bur oak. You can look at the leaf and see the waist in the middle of the leaf. There's always a waist, narrow part near the midrib of bur oak. And this is one of the most difficult to transplant trees, and I'm doing a lot of research on it. But if you can plant it in a small caliper and get this established, it will tolerate wet, it will tolerate dry, it will tolerate alkaline soil. It's one of the toughest trees out there. So bur oak is just a great tree. And this one is swamp white oak, Quercus bicolor, which again, given its name, you'd think it does well in swampy soil. But the key thing about swamp white oak is also incredibly drought tolerant. So it's one of those trees that have an ability to tolerate wet soils, which we might be getting in some cases, and very, very dry soils, which are, climate change, rainfall events will cause this to happen. So swamp white oak is one of the most adaptable trees. We're doing some research on this and creating some new swamp white oak hybrids, which deal with sometimes their sensitivity to alkaline soils. So stay tuned on that because we have some new ones coming. And this one for narrow space, this is a great hybrid. This is called Regal Prince Oak, which is a hybrid between swamp white oak and the fastigiate English oak. And so it has the best qualities of both if you want a narrow tree. And this is a street where trucks come by and trucks would prune the tree, but they don't have to do it since we've chosen this tree to be more upright and narrow. So a great tree that tolerates wet soil and alkaline soil, and just a bit narrower. So the hybrid elms are, there's a whole group of them. They're coming more and more. Be wary of the new American elms, which are supposedly resistant to Dutch elm disease. They may be resistant, they're not immune. These trees we're looking at here are not American elms. They are hybrids of various different Asian origin. The one on the right, probably the most popular, is called Accolade elm. And it's a hybrid between two Asian elms, and it has a beautiful shape, and it's very available, grows very fast. It's totally resistant to Dutch elm disease and phloem necrosis, which is another bad killer of elms. On the upper left, you see Pioneer elm, which is again been shown to be very, very resistant to the diseases. Has a little bit different shape, but a great tree for and elms. Why they were so good? They could tolerate wet, they could tolerate dry, alkaline. These trees do all of that, but they are also disease resistant as well. So be aware of that. So this slide is I just want to show you some. Look at the black line, okay? We have basically precipitation in centimeters on the left side, and we have dates on the right side. And we're looking at the black line denotes dates when our last frost date is supposed to be. And so right now, 1980, basically we're in late May was our last frost date up here, maybe downstate it's a little earlier, but as we go through the next decades, our last frost date is going to become earlier and earlier in the spring. And that might be nice. You might sort of think about putting your tomatoes out in April. But comes with that, if you look at the green, the precipitation variability is going to be quite extensive in terms of the increasing precipitation and decreasing precipitation, not an even sort of rainfall event. So that's going to be part and parcel of this warming trend, which is happening right now. I mean, I'm putting my tomatoes in last week, and there's no frost in the outlook at all. And yet we would always do that after Memorial Day 20 years ago. So it's
So
Things
you
are
put your
changing.
tomatoes in last week?
Yeah.
All right, so maybe I'll go for it this weekend.
But
I wait for Memorial Day.
Yeah, I look at the long range forecast, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to be fine. I don't put my eggplant out yet, but I remember having frost in 1st of June. That's not going to happen this year in any case. So it's going to be an earlier and earlier last frost date, and the rainfall is becoming much more and more variable and high and low. So these are things to be aware of that's going to happen in the next decades to come. So someone who asked about monocultures, the case for horticultural diversity is a key towards a sustainable landscape. So assuming you're going to do the right things with the soil and get their planting sites right, and also choose the right plants for these sites, then the next thing is not to plant the same thing over and over and over again. We've learned this. We did some research, and here you see cities and towns that we got inventories from 3 states, New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, and we looked at the diversity of trees in these street tree plantings. And not surprisingly, maple makes up, at least in New York State, about 44% of the street trees, and with oaks coming in 7%, honey locust at 5%, and lindens about 4%. If you take that all together, you're up above, nearly 60% of the trees are just these 4 genera. And this is a problem in terms of monoculture because, let me see if we get the next one. Well, okay. Well, I'm going to go back. Sorry about that. So as you know, if we hit one particular species, then an insect or disease likes that, just as we had with the American elms, it will devastate that part of the street tree population or any urban tree population. So we need to diversify to hedge our bets because there will be something new. I mean, I will guarantee there will be something new, some new insect, some new disease, and we're facing emerald ash borer and Asian longhorn beetle and oak wilt and all kinds of other things. So we need to diversify our trees as a hedge. In Ithaca, which I use as my downtown lab, we have 192 taxa on the street. That's very unusual. Most cities have about 10, mainly 10 to 15.
So do you work with the planning departments?
I'm chair of the Shade Tree Committee in Ithaca, so
how cool is that?
I sort of decide what we plant. and very neatly that people are willing to try things out. And most of the times we find things that we didn't know were good, and they are good. Sometimes are not appropriate, and we make note of that. So in New York State, we have about 4.2 million street trees. This is just between the sidewalk and the curb trees, and about an annual benefit of $135 per tree, and so about $560 million of benefits. And that's quantifiable benefits in terms of stormwater, energy conservation, carbon sequestration, pollution reduction, all those things I mentioned earlier. It's quantifiable by the Fire Service iTree software. So it's not like we just sort of thought about this. We actually quantified this. And in stormwater alone, we're getting $175 million of benefits for stormwater mitigation, which is a big issue from communities all around New York State. So the perfect tree, and then this is an old picture, American elm on Cornell campus. Look at the clock tower there. This is and then we had Dutch elm disease, and then the clock tower is still there, but no trees. And old picture. But we have a really flat learning curve. So now we have no cars in the street, but we have Whole Plaza, which we planted all of the same species London Plain, which is not necessarily susceptible to anything right now, but it could be. And even if we go further right now, what it looks like, there's a clock tower, but we have 1 species. So this is a flat learning curve. We haven't learned that we need to diversify even within a short space, because if these trees go down, that's a huge hit for the community. Again, Asian longhorn beetle in the bottom, which has a huge host range.
Like 5 minutes.
Okay. And Asian emerald ash borer, which is making its way throughout New York State right now. Worcester, when Asian longhorn beetle was found in Worcester, Massachusetts before and then after, you had to take all those trees down because they were infested. So we don't want to do that. I am doing work on oak propagation to find out trees that will, these are all my new little babies that are more tolerant of diseases, insects, stress. We have some really neat ones that are going to get into the trade very soon. So we're getting more interesting, more diverse plants, but we also, with the plants we know, we really should be planting more diverse. This is really a neat one, a bur oak times a Sonoran desert oak. Can you imagine? So we took our native bur oaks and we had got pollen from the Sonoran desert and we crossed them, and we have a very neat drought-tolerant, alkaline-tolerant oak here, which we hope to get out into the trade, just to show you a little something down the road. So, you know, plant selection, pest-resistant, adapted to site conditions, non-invasive, highly diverse. Notice I didn't say native, because native to where, native to when, that's a whole other question. Non-invasive, highly diverse, meets design and functional objectives, and matches management limitations. So these are the 4 basic ideas that should drive your plant selection thoughts. And I just want to, you know, I know that Celeste has given you some links to these, our Woody Plant Database, which is, I urge you, if you haven't seen it, to look at it. You can look in the left-hand corner, you see you can put a botanical name or a common name and press search and get that plant with lots of pictures. Or, more interestingly, you can go to search the database and you can put in the type of site conditions you have, and then and the plant type you want, shrub or tree, and you'll get a whole list of those. So here's a screenshot of a search result. I wanted trees. I wanted them to be in certain zones and have certain soil tolerances, and I got a whole list of trees that would do well in that. And then if I look at one of them in particular, this swamp white oak, favorite, and you can click on any of these pictures and get a full screen size picture, and it tells you all about the issues related, and the site issues related to the swamp white oak. You'll see the cultivars. You have hypertext there. You can see on how the cultivars are different than the straight species. And there's a little volume thing you can click on and hear me talking about how you ID the plant. This is mostly for my students, but for anybody.
I was going to ask you who the prime audience is.
Well, I did this for my students, but it's for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's out there and it's available. And I keep on working on it. So there's also recommended urban trees. This was a print form was done in 2009, but now it's on the Woody Plant Database and it's kept up. So you can print it off if you have a lot of paper, but it is updated now all the time.
And the links to all these things are on the, and they'll be on the website with the recording of this.
That's my website, the Urban Horticulture Institute website, and that's where you can get all these different resources. And I urge you to look through these. There are videos, there are all kinds of things that you can print off and just look at, and hopefully you'll get some ideas for planting and soil preparation down the road.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning. Yeah, no, it was perfect, actually. So I'm going to see if I can go back to, all right, let's see. So it's on your screen. Sometimes I have a hard time. Okay, good. So this is the Campus County Connections page. If you haven't been here before, you get there just by going to the staff site, so staff.cce.cornell.edu, and then click on units, organizational development and accountability. It's the longest name there, last but not least, and campus program connections. And that lists lots of different ways to get involved with, integrate campus and county. That's like the finest part of cooperative extension, is this integration we have. There's links to program work teams, funded research and extension projects. So if you want to see a list of any of that information, it's there. And then any of the upcoming webinars. So today's webinar, you can see, this page will kind of live on. So Nina's presentation will be here, replacing the webinar link, and the links to the resources that she mentioned are down below, as well as the slides. I'll put a link to the slides that she used today as well. So the next presentation is scheduled for June 7th, and it's building relationships in the New York State craft beverage sector. So it's an ag-related presentation, but I invite everybody to come. And as I mentioned, these webinars are very open. So if you have some collaborators that you want to engage and share with them the link or watch it with them together, that's totally appropriate. So thanks so much for joining us this morning. And Nina, thank you again. This was so interesting. Very, very interesting. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.